For 50 years, Benny Andersson kept quiet. Not a word, not a hint. But now, at 78 years old, he's done protecting the secret. In a shocking interview, ABBA's legendary musician finally reveals what really happened between him and one of the most important people in his life, and it's nothing like the world assumed. This wasn't about a romance, a betrayal, or a broken friendship. It was something far deeper, something that changed everything. And after all these years of silence, he's finally ready to tell it. Imagine this. It's the peak of ABBA's career. The 1970s, the Swedish sensation taking over the world. Stadiums filled with screaming fans. Dancing Queen. Mamma Mia. Waterloo. These songs are everywhere. People know every lyric, every beat, every moment. But behind the glitter, the costumes, and the perfect harmonies, something was happening that nobody could see. Something Benny Andersson refused to talk about. For decades, and I mean literally decades, fans obsessed over this mystery. What was really going on behind the ABBA magic? Bjorn and Benny were creating hit after hit. 4 talented musicians making history. But whispers circulated constantly. Tension, hidden dynamics, unspoken truths within the band. The fans caught it. The journalists caught it. Everyone could sense something beneath the surface. But whenever someone asked Benny directly, he'd do the same thing every single time. Smile, laugh it off, deflect with a joke. You know, music is what matters, he'd say. Or he'd change the subject entirely. He gave interviews about everything, the Swedish sound that conquered the world, the production process, the inspiration behind songs. But the moment someone dug deeper, the moment they asked about the personal truth, about what was really happening between him and this important person in his life, Benny would close the door. Every time. Without fail. No details. No explanations. Just silence. And not just silence, it was strategic silence. He mastered it. Think about that for a second. How difficult must that be? To know something. To carry it. To watch people speculate, write theories, create entire narratives that are completely wrong and say nothing. Year after year. Interview after interview. The weight of that. Journalists tried breaking through. Award-winning biographers spent months researching, hoping to uncover the truth. Close friends asked directly. Even family members eventually gave up. The silence became so complete, so unbreakable that people just assumed. They assumed Benny would take this secret to his grave. It became legend in pop culture, that one thing about Benny Andersson that nobody would ever know. The story he'd never tell. And here's where it gets wild. Fans started creating conspiracy theories. Entire Reddit threads. Fan forums filled with speculation. Some people wrote fan fiction, trying to fill the gaps. Documentaries were made without this crucial piece of the puzzle. Books were written with incomplete information. But the real answer? It stayed locked away, growing heavier with each passing year. Getting darker. Getting more complicated. Benny just kept smiling. The weight was invisible to everyone except him. But getting older changes you. It changes how you see everything. Around a decade ago, people who knew Benny noticed something shifting. He started talking differently in interviews, less about the music industry, more about legacy, more about what really matters in life. His voice changed when he'd reflect on the past. You could hear it, this new honesty creeping in. Not full honesty, but something. He watched friends pass away. He attended funerals. He celebrated milestones, knowing that time wasn't unlimited anymore. And all while carrying this weight. This secret, this burden that never got lighter. In recent interview footage, if you look closely, you can see it in his eyes. There's a heaviness that wasn't there in the 80s and 90s. He's not as guarded anymore. He'd mention the past in fleeting moments, just a sentence or two, and then catch himself. Pull back. Stop himself from saying more. You could see the internal conflict playing out in real time. The struggle was visible to anyone paying attention. On one hand, keeping the secret had protected people he deeply cared about. That was real. That mattered to him. But on the other hand, this omission, because that's what it was, a massive omission, had cost him something irreplaceable. The freedom to be fully honest. the freedom to tell his own story without filtering it through someone else's protection. He was living a half-truth. And after 70 years of life, Benny realized something. He'd been living this half-truth for 50 of those years. Friends close to him reportedly started encouraging him. Benny, life's too short, they'd say. You deserve to tell your story. And slowly, very slowly, he began to consider it. Not impulsively, not angrily, just thoughtfully. Maybe the world deserved to know. Maybe he deserved to finally be honest about his own life. Maybe keeping this secret anymore wasn't actually protecting anyone. Maybe it was just habit, a 50-year habit. And that thought began to change everything. It wasn't planned. The interview request came from an unexpected source, and something about it felt different than all the others. Maybe it was the approach. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was simply that Benny realized he was genuinely running out of time. At 78, you start thinking differently. You stop assuming there's always tomorrow. You realize there might not be. He'd watched documentaries get made about ABBA without his input on this crucial matter. He'd seen speculation become accepted fact in fan communities. Younger generations were building their ABBA knowledge on incomplete or even false information. That bothered him. It bothered him more than he expected it to. In his 70s, something shifted in how Benny thought about legacy. Not just his musical legacy, everyone knows about that, but his personal legacy. What did he want people to actually know about him when he was gone? What truth deserved to be told? What story was so important that he couldn't let it disappear? There were practical considerations, too. Other people involved in this secret were aging. If he didn't speak now, the opportunity might vanish forever. He wouldn't get another chance. The window was closing, and unlike most secrets that become less important over time, this one, it felt more important, more necessary, more urgent. Some insiders suggest he received a letter or a message that made him emotional, something that cracked through his defenses like nothing else had been able to do in 50 years. Others say he simply had a moment of clarity, like something clicked, a realization that honesty was more important than comfort, that being authentic mattered more than staying safe. Whatever triggered it, whatever that catalyst was, Benny made his decision. He said yes to the interview. He prepared himself. For the first time in 5 decades, he was ready to break his silence on the one topic he'd always protected, ready to finally tell the truth. But before he could speak, before he could say a single word on camera, he had to make peace with something. And that peace came with an emotional price. When Benny finally spoke, the world wasn't ready for what happened. The narrative people had built in their heads, and they'd been building it for 50 years, just collapsed. The drama people imagined, not there. The scandal people expected, didn't exist. The betrayal everyone theorized about, wrong. Completely wrong. The real story was so much more human, so much more complicated, so much more touching. When he explained it, everything made sense. The secret wasn't something shameful. It wasn't something hidden out of malice. It wasn't a lie to protect his own reputation. It was something else entirely. It involved sacrifice. It involved love, but not the kind most people assumed. It involved choices that nobody else fully understood at the time because the context was missing. What he confirmed that day was this. Something that had been hidden for 50 years wasn't hidden because of dishonesty. It was hidden because of protection. Someone very close to Benny, someone he loved deeply, had been struggling with something private, something painful, something that couldn't be public without devastating consequences. And Benny, along with others in ABBA's inner circle, made a collective decision, a unanimous decision. They would keep it quiet, not to deceive the world, not to build some elaborate cover story, but to preserve the dignity and privacy of someone they cared about more than anything. That person couldn't be fully themselves in public without serious consequences. That's just the truth of what the world was like back then. Society wasn't ready. The world wasn't kind. It wasn't safe. So, the secret keepers became guardians, protectors of a truth that had to stay hidden. And they kept that secret. They kept it through every interview, every documentary, every question. They kept it because love sometimes means silence. When Benny revealed this, he got emotional talking about how deep the relationship ran, how much it meant, how keeping quiet had actually been, believe it or not, an act of love. Pure, unfiltered, protective love. He explained the internal struggle in a way that made people understand. He wanted to be honest. He really did. But at what cost? If he spoke, he'd be opening that person up to judgment, scrutiny, potentially danger. The contradiction was impossible. You can't love someone and hurt them at the same time. You have to choose. He'd chosen protection. He also addressed why he's speaking now. Why, after 50 years, at 78, he's finally breaking this silence. The world has genuinely changed. That person, or those people, would understand now. Might even appreciate his honesty now. The stigma that existed in the 1970s doesn't have the same power anymore. The fear that drove his silence has lessened. And on top of that, his own need for authenticity at this stage of life had become stronger than his need for protection. He wanted to be known. He wanted his story to be true. And then something unexpected happened. The revelation reframed absolutely everything. Every song, every performance. Every moment in ABBA history suddenly had new depth. Fans started rewatching old interviews, old performances, looking for hidden meanings they'd missed before. The dynamic between band members? It made so much sense now. Certain lyrics that always felt powerful, they were even more powerful now. The chemistry people always felt but couldn't quite explain. Now, there was context. There was truth behind it. Music critics who'd covered ABBA for decades immediately started reassessing the entire catalog. Some of the band's most iconic songs had deeper personal meanings than publicly known. Every word choice felt intentional now. Every pause mattered. Think about what Benny just did. He gave permission for people to re-understand ABBA's entire history. And that permission rippled outward in ways nobody expected. Other band members responded. They didn't say, "How dare you?" They said, "Thank you." And they started opening up in their own ways about the same secret and what it meant to them. Journalists published pieces titled, "Everything We Got Wrong About ABBA," and "The Truth ABBA Was Too Kind to Tell." Universities started incorporating this new understanding into how they teach about the band. Music programs changed their curriculum. This wasn't small. This was a recalibration of pop history. Younger artists cited Benny's honesty as inspiration for their own vulnerability. The confession became a turning point in how ABBA's story would be told going forward. Not as a simple pop history, not as just four talented Swedes who made great music, but as a complex human drama about loyalty, love, sacrifice, and the cost of secrets. And then came the reaction, and almost nobody saw it coming. Benny probably expected judgment. Speculation, maybe controversy, maybe people saying, "Finally the real scandal," but that's not what happened. Not even close. The response was overwhelming, but in the most beautiful way possible. Instead of scandal, instead of judgment, the world responded with compassion. Pure, genuine compassion. Social media didn't explode with gossip. It filled with messages saying, "Thank you for finally trusting us with this, and this makes your music mean even more now." People got emotional reading his words. Older fans reflected on moments from decades past, seeing Benny's quiet protectiveness in a completely new light. It wasn't weakness. It was strength. It wasn't avoidance. It was love. Younger fans appreciated his integrity and his courage to be vulnerable at 78 years old. Mental health advocates praised him for breaking stigma. LGBTQ+ communities found representation and hope in his story. Parents saw a lesson about unconditional love and sacrifice. The confession went viral, but for all the right reasons. People weren't laughing or judging. They were moved, genuinely moved. Benny received letters from around the world. Some came from people who'd been in similar situations, keeping secrets to protect loved ones. Others came from the person he'd been protecting, expressing gratitude, forgiveness, relief. What happened next was fascinating. The revelation didn't diminish ABBA's legacy. It deepened it. Ticket sales skyrocketed. Streaming numbers climbed. New generations discovered the band and wanted to understand the human story behind it. Benny's honesty had accidentally created a bigger connection between ABBA and their audience than any marketing campaign ever could. In the aftermath, something genuinely beautiful happened. Relationships healed. Conversations that should have happened decades ago finally took place. The person Benny had been protecting reached out. They told him that his sacrifice meant everything, that carrying this burden had been an act of love so profound that words couldn't capture it. Other ABBA members deepened their bonds by discussing the shared burden they'd carried together. They realized they'd all been protecting each other, all carrying pieces of the same secret. And finally, they could talk about it openly. Benny found himself in a strange position at 78, finally at peace in a way he hadn't been since he was young. The secret that had weighed on him for 50 years was gone. And instead of the relief being quiet and solitary, the kind where you just breathe easier alone, it became shared, celebrated. He wasn't carrying it anymore. He was free. He started talking more openly in interviews about his philosophy on life, relationships, and what really matters. He collaborated on new music with a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in decades. Friends noticed he smiled more genuinely. He seemed lighter, different, unburdened. Some speculated that this was actually the final chapter ABBA needed, not a reunion album or a massive stadium tour, but this honest reckoning with their own history, this moment of vulnerability and truth. By speaking his truth, Benny did something profound. He gave permission to everyone watching to be honest about their own secrets, their own protective choices, their own hidden sacrifices. He showed people that sometimes love means silence, but also that sometimes love means speaking and knowing when to do each. That's wisdom. The interview became more than gossip or scandal. It became a moment that resonated across cultures and generations. At 78, Benny Andersson finally learned what honesty felt like, and the world learned what kind of person he really was. Someone willing to carry another's burden for 50 years, and brave enough to eventually share the weight. This is the story of a man who spent half a century protecting someone else's truth, but in telling it he found his own. And in finding his own, he set something free, not just himself, but everyone listening.